Welcome to Vibe Zero Talk Show. I'm your host, Justus Otieno. Today we are glad to host one of the environmentalists, and we are very lucky to host him today. I know your time is very tight, but you've chosen today to come to Vibe Zero Talk Show. So I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Justus, and thank you to our viewers. My name is Dr. Tobias Nyumba from the University of Nairobi, as well as the African Conservation Center in Nairobi.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Vibe Zero Talk Show. So who is Tobias? Who is Dr. Tobias? Just briefly.
Yes, so Dr. Nyumba is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi's Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation. I'm also a biodiversity conservation specialist, particularly focusing on matters to do with the wildlife and their habitats or key habitats, but also looking at the matters of development and environment, particularly how some of these major developments are impacting on major environmental systems as well as social systems in the country, with a focus on the likes of the SGR as well as key infrastructure in the country. But also, I'm currently, part of a member of the World Parks Commission, and what you're trying to look at is also how some of these protected areas can be, managed for the benefit of wildlife, as well as, issues to do with the protection of their integrity or the services they provide to the community.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nyumba. You've really put it clearly who you are, and we are lucky to host you here. Particularly, we want to discuss about the issue to do with environment, and now we are also lucky that we are here down at coastal city of Mombasa, where there's SGR, we have got blue economy, we have got a lot of issues touching environment, and particularly we want to discuss more about we have heard about this thing, climate change. What is this climate change, particularly in coastal region? How does it affect us?
Well, I think that's a very interesting, topic to discuss, Justus. Particularly when we talk about matters climate change, I think a lot of discussion has gone on, but to most of the laymen, they are already experiencing certain things that they haven't been able to understand, but they clearly fall within the realm of what we call the climate change. So when you talk about climate change, we are talking about the changes in the temperature, changes in precipitation, the melting. In some areas, talk about the melting of the glaciers, the rise in water levels in lakes and rivers. Those are manifestations of climate change. But in general, these are just some events or episodes of those extreme climatic events that are occurring, like extreme droughts, talk about extreme precipitations and the floodings that lead to things like landslides, but also, conditions that allow for the emergence of certain diseases, like, either the ones that are linked to bacteria, viruses, but also, some of the insect and mammal species that are related to that. So these conditions that are currently changing in different areas of the world that are allowing for the manifestation of new issues coming up, but also the disappearance of existing or other, old events that used to occur in those locations.
So how do you find temperature in Mombasa?
Oh my. Well, I think it's my third time coming to Mombasa, and I would say that as much as it's still pretty much hot, but I think it's not as hot as it was when I first came in 2000. I was back here in 2014. And I think, you will be surprised to know that I actually fainted twice because of, high temperatures and lots of vapor. But surprisingly, in 2020, I came in and unless I engage in high activity, when I'm just walking around, it's pretty much still hot compared to Nairobi, but it's not as hot as it was before. Now, that is a good example of climate change that I was talking about, changes in temperatures, either being much lower or being much higher than what it's supposed to be under normal circumstances in each region.
Okay. So, Dr. Nyumba, we've seen the SGR in coastal region, and part of the Dongo Ukundu Road has fallen apart. One side of the road has been blocked. What can you say about that one? Does it in any way connected to climate change?
Well, I think partly yes and partly no. Now, partly yes, in the sense that what we've seen there with that massive landslide is as a result of heavy downpour that has been experienced in the coast. And I think what that has meant is that the soil has been, heavily soaked, and therefore it has become loose and is falling apart. And of course, we appreciate that the engineers actually tried to put together some concrete on top to try and, hold it all together. But I think it shows also poor engineering, because you cannot hold together loose soil using concrete. It's never happened. It's not going to happen. And the Dongo Kundu bypass, infrastructure wasn't going to be the first experimental. So I would say that due to lack of climate change awareness, planning for that kind of future wasn't taken into account. And so when the heavy rains, pounded the area, it all got fully flooded, and so the result is the falling off of that entire section. We've seen similar scenarios across the SGR, for instance, sometime back in, I think, late last year around Voi, where a section of the SGR collapsed, particularly the embankments, as a result of, land, or rather soil getting wet and falling off. If you went down in Suswa, we had a similar scenario where even before the construction was finished, the entire section of that embankment collapsed because the soil structure wasn't able to hold it. So those are some of the examples of how matters climate change and those extreme events can really impact on the infrastructure if there's no prediction to ensure that mitigation measures are put in place.
Okay, well said, Daktari. I want to ask you that before initiating this kind of big project like SGR, do you usually work together with these engineers in order just to ensure that this kind of landslide or the side effect of land falling or the road cracking is not happening? Do you usually work together?
Now, that's a very interesting question, Justus. By the virtue of the fact that roads are done by engineers, you would imagine that me as an environmentalist, I wouldn't really have a say in that. And I think this is a mentality that has really gone on in the country, where people do things in what we call silos, or it is more or less sectoral approach to some of these development approaches. And so what we've seen is a situation where the engineers are busy doing their engineering work, the environmentalists are doing their environmental advocacy work, those in agriculture are doing their own things. And the implication therefore is that whenever the engineers have done their roads, then they do not take into account the environmental aspects, they do not take into account the social aspects, and as well as other issues that emerge. Now, this one, we must appreciate that the Kenyan government has really tried to put in place measures to provide a platform for that through the environmental and social impact assessments. And so it's a requirement that before initiating some of these major projects, the proponents must engage in a thorough study called the environmental and social impact assessments to identify in a consultative manner what sort of impacts are likely to emerge, where are they likely to emerge, and how are they likely to emerge, and what measures should be put in place to address them. Unfortunately, what we are seeing now is an exercise in futility. Why do I say that? Whereas these things are stipulated in clear guidelines by the National Environment Management Authority, the implementation process, the enforcement, and the regulation process is lacking entirely. So we have a situation where the consultants, for instance, for the SGR, are actually paid by the SGR proponents, be it the Kenya Railways in this case, to conduct an SGR for the to conduct an environmental and social impact assessment for the Kenya Railways. Now, consider this scenario. I've hired you to do a job for me. I'm paying you to do a job for me. Really, are you going to give me a good result or a favorable result, or you are going to give me a result that stops me from doing my job? The answer is you are going to give me a favorable result. So the way the current EIA process is structured, it allows the consultants and the proponents of the project, in quotes, to collude, because I'm paying them to do the job for me. I do not expect them to bring a report that's going to stop me from doing my job. So as much as the EIA regulations are quite ambitious, the law is very clear on what needs to be done and the consultation process, the implementation is wanting. And so